Have you ever wanted to make a graphic novel, but you're not sure where to get started? Well, today we're going to talk about the specific steps that Ben and I took to go from just an idea to a 657-page graphic novel series published by Random House.
The Wizards of Eam is our show about storytelling, game design, and everything in between. And like James said, we're going to be talking about how to make a graphic novel. We're going to break it down into 3 steps. We're going to talk about 2 key behaviors that are essential to keeping up the grind of making a graphic novel and finishing it.
The grind, because that's what it can feel like for sure.
It's a marathon, and we'll get into that. But first, we want to talk about, the ideation stage, coming up with ideas, brainstorming, and James and I, we have a benefit of knowing each other since 2nd grade. We do this thing that we call riffing with each other, and we'll isolate ourselves from society, and we will come up with ideas, and we'll spit it back and forth just like we did on the playground when we were 9, and we'll be like, James, what if this thing happened? What if there was a skeleton who was a bard?
And I'd bounce back at Ben and say, oh, that's a cool idea. What if his best friend was a gelatinous goo? Just like a little dollop, and he can't even speak. It's just punctuation.
They're like C-3PO and R2-D2.
Okay,
and,
now we're cooking with gas.
Hit the ground running, okay?
Hit the ground running.
And that's really kind of where it started. We wanted to make a couple of unexpected heroes who worked in a dungeon, and then we were kind of thinking more about who really Rickety Stitch is. We wanted him to have a mysterious past, and so that kind of led us down this path of the plot of Rickety Stitch.
Rickety Stitch and Gelatinous Goo is a graphic novel series by us that was originally published by Random House. It's a story of a skeleton bard who goes on an epic quest to discover who he was when he was alive.
He's an amnesiac, and he can't remember who he was when he was alive. All he remembers is being woken up among a legion of skeletons, being woken up by a lich, and that's a dream, a recurring dream that he keeps having. So we're coming up with ideas, and then we start to define the characters. Okay.
Yeah, and defining the characters for Rickety Stitch was a long iterative process. We spent 20 years with the idea of Rickety Stitch before we actually ended up creating the graphic novel series. And in that time, Rickety Stitch was a different character several times. At first, he was like kind of a aloof, irreverent, a dungeon monster. But then as we developed his character and developed the story, we thought there's much more to him here, much more to him here.
But yeah, little known fact, we actually released Rickety Stitch as like a newspaper comic and a web comic where it was sort of like a buddy, two roommates on a couch, Rickety and Gooey, like having fun and doing random things just for the gags. And we always knew that Rickety was destined for more, but we didn't really start nailing any of that stuff down until a few years later after coming up with Rickety Stitch.
So after we go through this creative phase where we block out the characters, we feel comfortable with the storyline, we go into the phase where we actually outline the entire story on paper. And the way that Ben and I do that is literally writing all of the story beats in a big list, like a big grocery list, essentially. We don't go overboard with detail. We don't start writing dialogue right away.
Yeah, and we outline because we are collaborating on the writing, and it would be impossible. Some other cartoonists, they will thumbnail and write at the same time, but that's just not feasible with 2 people. When you got 2 people, you got to have a solid script, basically. And the first step, like James said, we outline. And I think it's worth trying if you haven't, because it will really set the stage for everything that comes next. You want to get the planning really solid.
I think outlines can really be a helpful tool to alleviate the pressure of getting it right the first time, and to give you a chance to, move those note cards around to formulate a story that's more fulfilling for you and for the reader.
Yeah. Once we do have this outline and we're feeling really strong about the structure of the story and all the story beats, everything that needs to happen, that's when we'll actually start writing the script. And our scripts look like, it'll say page 1, and then break down each of the panels: panel 1, panel 2, panel 3, panel 4, panel 5, panel 6, but on and on. Usually at this point,
forever.
In our early days of making comics, I would pack panels in there. But I think as time goes on, we're doing less and less panels, just to like let things breathe and really show environments and establishing shots and all that. It really depends on your style and the kind of pace of what you're doing?
The structure of the pages is pretty simple. It's you start with the page number, we put the panel number. One thing that's really important is making clear descriptions of what's happening in the panel. At least that's how we work. And then when it comes to the dialogue, we actually workshop the dialogue quite a lot because Ben and I are collaborators. We are, and mostly because we've known each other our entire lives, we'll actually write a graphic novel simultaneously with each other. And many times we're workshopping dialogue back and forth as we're writing it and seeing the character come alive on the page, which is awesome and a really fun part of the process for both of us.
And what's interesting with us is that sometimes James will be writing or vice versa, and then the other person will like skip ahead and start writing like panels ahead just because we know what's happening. We have this outline in front of us and we know what we need to get to right ahead of each other and meet in the middle. And it's great that way because we can work pretty fast.
The outline is what makes that possible. I just want to reiterate that.
Yeah.
The outline makes that possible because we know what's going to happen. And when we do come together, there's probably hundreds of times where we laughed our butts off because we would start like talking to each other as the characters on the page and responding to dialogue that was being written seconds before. It's always like really fun and satisfying. And we would laugh, and it's a good time.
That's one thing that happens I feel like, especially with comics, is that you go where the characters are taking you. Sometimes you will just kind of stray away from the outline because you're following a funny joke and you want to, see it paid off, or like a sight gag or visual thing that just spontaneously comes up in writing. So don't be afraid to venture away from the outline that you've already established, because there's a lot of improvisation that comes up in writing that it's very fruitful.
Totally. And there's nothing like hard and fast about how we approach this. This is just our methodology, and maybe, some nuggets here will be helpful to you.
I think what I was just touching on is why a lot of cartoonists thumbnail and write at the same time. There's that improvisational thing with the art in the writing that happens, and you're like seeing it happen on the page in front of you. So you can come up with things that you could never come up with just a script.
So you're finished with your script. It's been a couple of weeks, or maybe even a couple of months, or maybe you worked on it all year, but you've got your script. You're really happy with how it reads. And now it's time to thumbnail. At least I should say, for Ben and I, it's time to thumbnail. And this is where Ben goes into his mind and starts to craft how the panels will fall on the page. And a lot of changes can happen during this phase.
So thumbnailing is really essential for mapping out the flow of the comic and really setting the pacing of everything. And pacing is key in comics. That's like one of the key elements of storytelling, like how each image flows to the next, what you're not showing in between the panels. So when you're thumbnailing, you really want to focus on capturing the best angles, the best composition to tell each individual panel. Because comics, I mean, you're really drawing like 6 individual pictures page usually.
It's a lot.
And so you've got to develop a sense of storytelling, and reading a lot of movies.
It's a whole other episode just on, telling stories with images. Like there's so many tips and tricks that are specific to that. But like one example that Ben mentioned earlier about like a set piece, you may find in the script that you didn't give enough room to, your character arriving at a new setting. And it's important to see where the character is, just like you're reading a novel. It's like usually there's some sort of description of where that setting is, or where they've arrived, or where they're
establishing shot.
The classic establishing shot. That's like a great example of something that will likely need more space on the page so that the reader can get a sense of the location in the world.
Yeah, and there will be a lot of discrepancies between the script and the thumbnails. You might find out that during an action sequence, we need like 3 more panels to show this piece of action. We only gave it 1. It's like putting together a puzzle with all these different puzzle pieces. What else we got about thumbnails? I could tell you, I could go on and on. It's like doing push-ups for me. Like I can breeze through like 12
that's
at a time.
That's how he gets buff before the final art. You know what I mean? Like but
it uses a lot of brain power. So like after like 10 to 12, I am pretty bushed and I need to take a break. You can't do like the entire comic in one sitting, just because of like all the machinations going on in your brain. It's just like figuring out, okay, if this is an established shot here, this needs to be, over here. One thing I will say, you want to vary the composition of your panels, especially during like talking head sequences where people are just talking to each other. You want to think of innovative angles in the scene where you can, and maybe focus on inanimate objects while people are talking. You don't just always want to have heads back and forth without any dynamic visuals.
That's totally true. One last thing I'd say about thumbnailing, just in like a general thought that I have whenever it's complete, is that I feel that after the script and thing are done, that's like the quantum leap forward for any project, because for the first time you can read it and see how it play out. And that really takes the pressure. I always talk about taking the pressure off of the different steps, because it's just like it's how I approach creative projects, because I myself worry about getting written into a corner or like not sure, but the thumbnails really take it to that next step so that you have a clear roadmap, like Ben says, for tackling the next phase, which is sketching the individual pages and panels.
Right. We have the outline is super important for writing the script, and writing the script is super important for the thumbnails, and having the thumbnails is super important for the penciling. It cuts out guesswork. You know exactly what you're doing. It's all laid out for you. You don't have to worry about the bulk of everything you're doing. There might be changes here and there, but you're confident in this roadmap that you have.
Right.
So penciling, whatever you want to call it, you're really refining the thumbnails, because sometimes when you're doing thumbnails, it could look like chicken scratch to another person. As long as you know how everything is composed and where the characters are, then that'll work for a thumbnail. But obviously, once you move to the penciling stage, it's got to be refined, especially if you're working with an inker or something. They have to know what exactly is going on.
Yeah, like communicating visually clearly in the sketching is very important, depending on your approach.
For me, I can get away with doing looser pencils because it's my art and I know what I was going for. And sometimes I think I fall into this category too. Some artists, if the pencils are too rigid or like too defined, then they can get into a mode where they're just tracing the pencils and it'll look really stiff and kind of lose the energy of it. So one thing I like to do is just be kind of loose and then still have sort of that improvisational line that retains the energy of what you're doing, especially with action. I think that helps.
I'm always surprised by the final rendition with the inking. When you go through and you ink it, there's so much more that is in those images, so much more emotion, so much more clarity that's provided than are in the thumbnails, that it's like this little treat for me whenever the first pages start to trickle through to my desk.
Yeah. Inking for me, I think at this point takes the longest, just because it's like James says, there's sort of this level up from the penciling. And I try at my best to pencil and ink a page in a day. And then the next day I will color everything of that page. So it depends on if you're going for a black and white or color comic. Obviously, black and white will be faster, although you do trade off with having to be aware of like contrast and making sure everything is readable in black and white, which is a skill in itself. And I struggle with that sometimes. Sometimes color is a crutch, but color obviously looks great too.
Color is a crutch. I'll make sure that we take that clip and make it seem like you're really mad about it and really have a strong position.
I don't know. It really depends on the artist. But when I'm doing colors, especially for the Land of Eam, they're big and bright. They're bold. They're saturated. I did another graphic novel series before Pong the Wandering Shell and Monk, and those were more muted and like, watercolory. So it really depends on your project. But like I said, 2 days per page. That's like the ideal. Obviously, that won't happen all the time. When I first started out doing comics, I was so slow. I was doing 1 page a week. I eventually got better over decades.
Yeah, I mean, and like that kind of goes directly into our next topic about how to make it happen. Really, there's the creative process, and then there's all those traits that you have to have and those behaviors that you have to exercise in order to get the graphic novel completed. And as Ben said, like, it used to take him a week to do a page, or now he can do a page in 2 days. The key to comics really is It's a marathon. You can't sprint your way to the end. You can't procrastinate and be done in a weekend. Comics are all about having the discipline to do it every single day and to take bite-sized chunks, which is totally fine. You would be amazed how much you can produce if you're only working for a few minutes every day or a few hours every day. It really adds up. That's how Rickety Stitch became 3 volumes. It was like several years of slowly pecking away at it until the project was complete. And Ben and I approach every single project by having a clear and disciplined calendar for ourselves, where we are putting work into whatever that project is, whether it's a Dungeoneer Adventures series or a Land of Eam something or other. It's all about daily movements forward, working a little bit or a lot so that you can marathon it and win at the end.
This is even true. I mean, especially true if you have a day job, because, not everyone can do this without having a day job. So, putting in that hour or two before you go to work or after work, that will add up over a year.
It goes a long way.
Like 700 hours right there of work.
Yeah.
So you could produce a lot of pages.
700 hours is a significant amount of time to get better at what it is that you're doing as well. You can get significantly better by putting in 700 hours of practice into something. And then you actually end up in Ben's situation where it started as a week, then it was a few days, and now the same amount of output is 2 days. So Ben can get 2.5 pages done or 3 pages done in a week if he's pushing it.
And if I'm really pushing it, I could go faster than that. If up against a deadline, I've done like 8 pages in a week, that type of thing.
Yeah.
I don't recommend that.
That's the have orcs at your back strategy.
Keep going there, out of there, Costa.
I remember during Rickety Stitch book 2, I was just up against the wall and I was coloring like 5 pages a day. It was wild. Sometimes life gets in the way of all this and backloads a bunch of work. That's just what happens. But you got to have the discipline to finish it.
It's like doing anything. It's like exercising. Just make it so that it's not something that you can skip out on. You just have to do it for a few minutes a day, and you will get better. Your output will increase, and your project will find a place where it's concluded. But it's not always easy to keep up that regimen.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes life obligations get in the way, like we were saying, or health problems crop up. Your job is taking up more of your time. It would be easy to quit.
We could have quit over the years, but it can definitely, and it can impact your confidence as well. That's the second trait that we recommend exercising, which is perseverance, sticking to it, ups and downs. It's not always going to be fun, but it is going to be fun more times than it's not going to be fun. And the reward of just finishing a book or finishing a game or whatever it is, a painting, whatever you're working on, is so satisfying. Ben and I often joke we don't celebrate enough when we finish a book, because our celebration is like, what's next? What can we dig in on? Because mostly we've been friends for our entire lives and it's super fun to work on stuff. So it's like, that's what we would be doing anyway, but we got to get better about having a pizza.
I want to touch on the confidence again, because
yeah.
You can reach a point in a project where something is really hard. Like maybe there's this really hard sequence. You don't like how your drawing is turning out. You don't like, maybe you didn't like how it was written. You want to rewrite it. In these moments, you can lose your confidence, but I think it's important to just trust the creative process. Like if you show up every day and put in a little bit of work through the struggles to finally get to the end point, I think you will. You just have to trust the creative process. And I have to deal with this sometimes too, because not everything is easy when you're making a book. Like you're going to run into problems.
No, trusting the creative process sounds like a soundbite, but let me try to break what that is actually like so that people can, really engage with that idea. By pecking away at something and following a plan, you will conclude it. There's no way you can't do it unless you stop doing it. It's worked wonders for us. It's made it so that we can work remotely over Zoom with mountains of responsibilities on top of us, both personal and professional, and still get the books completed. Land of Eam is a really good example, because Land of Eam is 1,000 pages of material that we produced while also writing books for publishers like Simon & Schuster. And we produced it by just pecking away at it every day. Even now, we're pecking away at our responsibilities, editing the new Underlands sandbox setting that we want to promote and share in 2025. That element is a really important one for me, because it's a battle of inches. really.
Yeah.
It's like,
That, I think like one way this could be illustrated is like when I'm doing a cover or like a big splash page and I'm coloring it, and the only answer to that is to keep working on it. I could like
yeah,
abandon it and it'll still look like crap.
yeah.
I trust that if I put more hours into it, I'll start to see it come together, and I'll find like, the visual hook or whatever that really sets me off and, and lets me finish it.
Yeah. Yeah. And in my hobby time, I paint miniatures, mostly Warhammer miniatures. And there's always this thing called the ugly phase where I just am not happy with what it is that
Yeah.
I'm producing. But then sometime like in the last few days of painting something, it comes to life. It's like, oh, there's the details I was looking for. And the only trick was just to continue to literally continue to layer upon it until it's complete,
Right.
which is exactly like a book cover. You layer it on until
And
it's all there.
that always happens in the writing process for us. It's layer
Mhm.
by layer. We will run into logistical problems in the story, but we'll riff, bounce ideas back off each other like over and over and over until we solve the problem.
Right. And for Ben and I writing a book, we do this a couple of times. It's iterative. So we'll do draft one, we'll go through it, we'll edit it, we'll discover things, we'll do draft two. And not that we're rewriting the whole thing, we're just addressing all of the things that we discover. And even that, it's iterative. It's just like, a couple inches a couple inches a day until we get to a place where it's like, all right, this is looking pretty good. We love this. This is a fun story.
Yeah. And it's always great to get other people's feedback. So have them read it, see what they say about the story. We have a little bit more to say about the perseverance of that, because sometimes if let's say you're submitting a comic to publishers and they reject it.
What do you do?
What do you do? That hurts.
How do
And
you
it happened
approach
to
it?
us.
Yep.
We submitted Rickety Stitch to a publisher early on and it got rejected. And it can be shocking at first. We're like, oh, I thought this was amazing. I thought this is like the thing that we were going to publish, but it makes you reflect on the story and kind of go back to the drawing board. I think that's the only way to move forward. You got to re-examine everything and look at it from a new lens. You don't have to take everything that they were saying to heart.
No, and we're not saying put it in a drawer for 10 years and then go back to it. That's not how we think. We're going to record another episode just about getting published and the process that Ben and I utilized to get published, to get Rickety Stitch and Dungeoneer published. We'll focus on the Rickety Stitch because it's early in our careers and it's got the highs and lows and a really good example. And it'll pair nicely with what we talked about today.
Part of the perseverance is just having the conviction of, I know this story is good. I want to share it with people in the world, even if it's just a few readers. It's important to me to see this through. And no other project that we've worked on is that more true than Rickety Stitch. Like, it's even true now because we planned so much for Rickety Stitch. We were able to do a 3-book series for Random House, and which is going to be republished with Exalted Funeral soon. But we still have so many more plans for Rickety Stitch that any other person would probably call us crazy, but we're going to see it through because it's so important to us.
We're going to tackle it inch by inch. We're going to see it through because we're going to take it one step at a time, one day at a time.
Indeed.
Yeah. So anyway, I'll sum it up. So the creative process for Ben and I creating a graphic novel, it starts with having an idea and fleshing it out and feeling comfortable with it. Then we outline it all out so we can take the pressure off ourselves writing the script because we know what's going to happen when. Then we write a script. And after we write the script, Ben starts to work on the thumbnails so that it's all organized visually. And then we've really got the story. And then Ben will take it into the final stages, the great marathon where he sketches it out, inks it all, final colors and word balloons. And that's how we go about making a graphic novel.
We keep honing that discipline and perseverance because you need it during this long marathon of making comics. Go forth.
Go forth and create. Create your wonders.
We hope this will help you just a little bit. Hope you can get some little nugget out of it. Everyone has their own process, but this is ours.
This is what works for us. So we figured we'd share. We get asked a lot. Anyway, thanks for joining us on the Wizards of Eam podcast. We'll be back in another episode where we talk about getting published. If you are not familiar with Land of Eam or Rickety Stitch, you can check it out on landoфeam.com. We've got all the stuff about what Rickety Stitch is. And like Ben said earlier, Rickety Stitch is brand new Exalted edition with all 3 volumes and a slipcase is coming out from Exalted Funeral. So if you're interested in checking out these tales of a skeleton bard and his gummy friend, you can check it out at exaltedfuneral.com.
Indeed. Until next time, my friend. Bye-bye now.